Growing up, I always thought my family was the picture of normalcy. My parents, Richard and Laura Bennett, were deeply invested in raising us, right? They had shelves overflowing with parenting books, each filled with strategies to unlock a child's potential. Conversations at home often revolved around developmental theories and milestones. To an outsider, it might have seemed like they were just doting parents. But to me, it felt like being part of an unending experiment. When I was born, my parents were new to parenting but determined to do it perfectly. My early years were a whirlwind of flashcards, enrichment toys, and scheduled playdates. They measured my development against charts and timelines, noting down every word I spoke and every step I took. I hit my milestones, walking, talking, and reading, right on schedule, but that wasn't enough for them. My parents wanted extraordinary, and I was simply ordinary. Then came Jessica, 3 years younger than me. With her arrival, everything shifted. Jessica wasn't just their second child. She was their second chance to get everything right. While I grew up with colorful blocks and bedtime stories, Jessica had advanced puzzles and books that claimed to boost cognitive ability. Every milestone of hers was celebrated as if she'd split the atom. When she spoke her first words earlier than average, they clapped like it was a standing ovation. If she solved a puzzle meant for older kids, they proclaimed her a genius. I noticed the differences early. Jessica's toys were educational tools, while mine were just toys. Her achievements were always front and center, while mine were barely acknowledged. It hurt, but I learned to expect little and ask for less. The only place I ever felt truly valued was at my grandparents' house. My grandparents, Eleanor and Walter Bennett, lived just a few blocks away, and their home became my refuge. They didn't compare me to Jessica or demand perfection. To them, I was simply their granddaughter, perfect as I was. I remember sitting on Grandma's lap, listening to her read stories to both Jessica and me. "You're both so special," she would say, handing us cookies with a warm smile. Those moments felt like sunlight cutting through a cloudy sky. But my parents didn't see it that way. My mother would purse her lips whenever Grandma said things like that. Acknowledging exceptional talent is important, she'd mutter under her breath, always referring to Jessica. At dinner one night, my father chimed in, "Jessica has so much potential. We need to nurture it." "Tiffany, you understand, don't you?" By the time I was 7, I did understand. Jessica was the star, the child destined for greatness. I was the trial run, the rough draft before the masterpiece. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a hierarchy, and I was firmly at the bottom. My grandparents saw it, too. Grandma once told my mother during an argument, "Children aren't projects, Laura. They need love, not pressure." But my parents didn't listen. And I just tried to keep my head above water in a house where I would always come second.
School was a mixed bag for me.
I wasn't the top of my class, but I wasn't at the bottom either. I enjoyed learning, had a close circle of friends, and brought home report cards filled with a mix of A's and B's. For most parents, that would have been something to celebrate. For mine, it barely warranted a glance. Jessica, on the other hand, was their prodigy, or at least that's how they saw her. She could recite her ABCs earlier than me, so when she started school, my parents were determined to showcase her brilliance. Instead of the local public school I attended, Jessica was enrolled in Ridgecrest Academy, a private school renowned for its rigorous curriculum and prestige. Tuition there cost more than most people's yearly salaries, but for Jessica, no expense was too great. At home, the differences in how we were treated were glaring. While I did my homework quietly at the kitchen table, Jessica had a special study corner decked out with expensive educational tools. When I proudly brought home a science project, a solar system model I had spent weeks perfecting, I eagerly showed it to Mom, expecting even a small word of praise. She barely glanced at it. "That's nice, Tiffany," she said dismissively before turning to Jessica. "Oh, Jessica just got invited to join the advanced math program. Isn't that exciting?" Meanwhile, Jessica was rewarded for every little achievement. If she aced a test, she got a trip to the toy store. If she had a tough day, my parents would offer her a new gadget or dollhouse as an incentive. It wasn't long before Jessica learned how to play the system. If I get an A on this quiz, she'd say with a sweet smile, can I get the new video game? It was a game I never knew how to play, or even if I had, no one would have cared. The turning point came when I was 13. My room was my sanctuary, the only place I felt I could truly be myself. It was the bigger of the two kids' bedrooms, filled with posters of my favorite bands and photos of my friends. One evening, Jessica stomped into the living room, hands on her hips. I want Tiffany's room, she declared. Mine's too small, and I need more space for my study area. I waited for my parents to laugh and dismiss the ridiculous request. Instead, they exchanged thoughtful glances. That just makes sense, Dad said. Jessica has so many materials and equipment. She needs the space more than you do. I couldn't believe it. But that's my room. I protested, tears in my eyes. I've had it since I was little. Don't be selfish, Tiffany, Mom said coolly. Life isn't fair. The next day, while I was at school, they moved all my belongings into Jessica's smaller room. I came home to find her already settled in, her expensive desk where my bed used to be. That night, as I lay in the cramped space that no longer felt like mine, I stared at the ceiling and made a decision. In this house, I would always come second, but I vowed to myself that someday I would find a place where I didn't have to. College had always been my dream. For years, I'd poured myself into preparing for it, studying late into the night, volunteering at local organizations, and participating in extracurriculars to build a strong application. I wasn't aiming for Ivy League schools. I just wanted a solid education at a respected state university where I could pursue my passion for business. I could already picture it, the campus, the classes, the freedom to carve out my own path. When the acceptance letters started arriving, I was overjoyed. I carefully organized the packets and couldn't wait to share my plans at Sunday dinner, where my grandparents would also be present. That evening, I sat at the table, practically bursting with excitement, ready to share my news. So, Tiffany, Grandma said, smiling warmly, have you decided where you want to go for college? I straightened up, eager to explain. I've been looking at the business program at Crestwood University. They've got amazing internship opportunities and… About that, Mom interrupted, setting her fork down with a loud clink. We've been meaning to talk to you about college. Her tone sent a chill down my spine. I could already sense something was wrong. Your father and I won't be able to help with your tuition, she said matter-of-factly. We've decided to focus all our resources on Jessica's education. She's got a real shot at Ivy League schools, and those don't come cheap. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard her correctly.
What?
But I've already been accepted. I've worked so hard. Tiffany, Dad said, his voice clipped, Jessica has exceptional potential. You're capable of getting a job after high school, or maybe going to community college. We need to be realistic here. Realistic? Grandpa's fork clattered onto his plate. What about Tiffany's future? She's been working her tail off for this. She's ordinary, Mom said, as if it were the simplest fact in the world. Jessica is gifted. We have to make choices. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My face burned with humiliation and anger. Before I could say anything, I shoved my chair back and stormed out of the dining room. Tears blurred my vision as I ran to my room, my parents' dismissive words echoing in my mind. A soft knock came at my door not long after. Tiffany, sweetheart, may I come in? Grandma's voice was gentle. I didn't answer, but she opened the door anyway, sitting beside me on the bed. She wrapped her arm around my shoulders, her touch warm and reassuring. Your grandfather and I have talked it over, she said softly. We're going to pay for your college tuition. All of it. My head shot up.
What?
But it's too much. Nonsense, she said firmly. You deserve this. You've worked so hard, without any of the support you should have had. Let us do this for you. For the first time that night, I smiled through my tears. Their belief in me reignited my determination. I didn't need my parents' approval anymore. I had people who believed in me, and I was starting to believe in myself. College was everything I had dreamed of and more. Away from the suffocating expectations and favoritism of my parents, I felt a sense of freedom I'd never experienced before. I poured myself into my business classes, finding a surprising knack for analyzing market trends and understanding investment strategies. My professors often praised my sharp insights and work ethic, which only fueled my drive to succeed. Every weekend, I called my grandparents to update them on my progress. Their pride and encouragement felt like a lifeline, reminding me that I wasn't alone in this journey. "You're doing so well, sweetheart," Grandma would say, her voice brimming with joy. Grandpa would chime in with advice, always ending the call with, "We're so proud of you." It was during one of these calls that Grandma shared news about Jessica. "You won't believe what's happening with your sister," she began, her tone a mix of concern and exasperation. Jessica, who had been accepted to Princeton with great fanfare, was apparently struggling. "At first, your parents were so proud," Grandma said. "But once she got there, she seemed to lose all focus. She's barely attending classes, and when she does, she's either late or hungover." I wasn't entirely surprised. Jessica had never faced real responsibility before. She'd always had Mom and Dad to clean up her messes or bribe her out of trouble. But at Princeton, without their constant supervision, her perfect image began to crumble. A month later, Grandma called with more news. "Jessica's been expelled," she said, her voice heavy. "She failed nearly every class and racked up too many disciplinary violations. Your parents are in shock." I could imagine the scene at home. Mom and Dad frantically trying to convince themselves and anyone who would listen that it was all a misunderstanding, that Jessica was still their shining star. Meanwhile, Jessica had moved back home, treating their house like a hotel, sleeping until noon and partying late into the night. The irony wasn't lost on me. For years, my parents had poured all their resources into Jessica, indulging her every whim and praising her at every turn. Now they were left to deal with the consequences of their choices. As for me, I flourished. Each success in college added to my confidence. I took on internships, aced challenging courses, and even helped organize a campus investment club that quickly became one of the most popular student organizations. By the time I graduated, I had not only earned my degree but also secured a position as a junior investment analyst at a respected financial firm. Jessica's downfall and my own growth became a stark contrast. While she floundered under the weight of unrealistic expectations, I thrived by finding my own path. For the first time in my life, I felt truly independent, no longer chasing approval or waiting for validation. My success was my own, and it felt incredible. Starting as a junior investment analyst at Meridian Financial, I threw myself into my work with the same determination that had gotten me through college. I love the challenge of analyzing markets, identifying opportunities, and crafting strategies to maximize returns. It wasn't long before my efforts began to pay off. Within 2 years, I was promoted to senior analyst, and my reputation as a sharp, reliable professional grew steadily. My breakthrough moment came when I identified a critical flaw in one of our major investment portfolios. A pattern of high-risk investments had gone unnoticed by the senior team, and the potential losses were staggering. I spent 3 nights poring over data and preparing a detailed report. At an emergency meeting, I presented my findings along with a strategy to not only avoid the losses but also increase returns by reallocating investments. My plan exceeded expectations, and within months, the portfolio showed a 15% increase in returns. Clients were thrilled, and Meridian's reputation soared. Not long after, I developed an investment algorithm that identified emerging market opportunities before our competitors, solidifying my role as a rising star in the firm. By the time I was promoted to investment director, I had already become a key player in shaping the company's strategy. Life felt stable, even rewarding, but I hadn't heard from my parents since leaving for college. Then, one Saturday morning at the grocery store, I heard a voice I hadn't expected. "Tiffany? Is that really you?" I turned to see my parents, Richard and Laura, looking older and more tired than I remembered. Mom clutched her shopping cart like a lifeline, while Dad's face was a mixture of surprise and awkwardness. "We've missed you so much," Dad said, his voice unusually gentle. "Why don't you come over for dinner sometime?" I hesitated, but curiosity won out. Sure, I replied, unsure of what to expect. The dinner felt surreal. The same house, the same table, but everything seemed different. My parents asked endless questions about my job at Meridian, their pride seeming almost exaggerated. An investment director at such a young age, Mom marveled. We're so proud of you, honey. It didn't take long for Jessica to take center stage. She had brought a guest, a tall, impeccably dressed man named Charles. During dinner, she introduced him as her boyfriend, emphasizing his family's vast real estate empire. Jessica beamed as Mom and Dad fawned over him, asking about his business ventures and private school education. See? Jessica said smugly, shooting a pointed look my way. I bet you didn't think I'd find someone before you, Miss Career Woman. Her words stung, but I kept my composure. I'm happy for you, Jessica, I said simply, refusing to rise to her bait. For my parents, Charles represented renewed hope in Jessica's future. They hung on his every word, acting as though his wealth and status were Jessica's achievements by proxy. I realized that even after all these years, their priorities hadn't changed. But I had, and their approval was no longer something I needed to chase. When I was promoted to investment director at Meridian Financial, I felt like I'd finally reached a turning point. It was the culmination of years of hard work and determination, and I wanted to celebrate the milestone with the people who mattered most. My grandparents, of course, were thrilled. Mom, on the other hand, insisted that the party be held at their house. It'll be more personal, she said, and we'll take care of all the arrangements. I agreed, transferring money into her account for decorations, catering, and everything else. Mom promised it would be a night to remember. In hindsight, she wasn't wrong, but not for the reasons I'd hoped. The evening began beautifully. The house was immaculately decorated, with fresh flowers and elegant table settings. The aroma of gourmet food filled the air, and family members mingled in lively conversation. Dressed in my favorite black cocktail dress, I felt ready to share my achievements with everyone. As dinner began, I stood up with a glass of champagne, ready to make my announcement. I want to thank everyone for coming tonight. Oh, sweetie, let me. Mom interrupted, practically glowing with excitement. She turned to the room and beamed. We've gathered here today to celebrate a wonderful occasion. Jessica and Charles are engaged. Gasps and cheers erupted around the table. Jessica, sitting smugly next to Charles, lifted her hand to show off a massive diamond ring. My stomach dropped as I realized what had just happened. The party I had planned and paid for had been hijacked for Jessica's engagement announcement. I sat down, my champagne glass trembling in my hand, as the room buzzed with congratulations. No one seemed to notice that I hadn't spoken a word. The injustice of it all burned in my chest until I couldn't stay silent anymore. This party, I said, standing up again, my voice cutting through the chatter, was supposed to be for my promotion to investment director at Meridian Financial. I paid for everything, the food, the decorations, all of it. My parents took my money and turned it into an engagement party for Jessica without telling me. The room fell silent. Aunt Martha dropped her fork with a clatter, and Uncle Greg's eyes widened in shock. Is that true? Someone asked. Mom flushed red. Tiffany, stop this nonsense. Don't ruin the evening. It's already ruined, I said firmly. But not by me. Charles stood up slowly, his face a mixture of anger and disbelief. You told me this was a family dinner to announce our engagement, he said, looking at Jessica. You didn't say anything about stealing your sister's celebration. Charles, wait, Jessica pleaded, but he shook his head. No, he said firmly. I've seen enough. This engagement is off. Jessica's face crumpled as Charles walked out, and the room erupted into chaos. Amid the shouting, Grandpa stood, his voice booming. Enough. Eleanor and I have decided. We've changed our will. Everything we have will go to Tiffany. She's the only one in this family who's shown integrity. Mom gasped, and Jessica ran from the room in tears. I gathered my things, holding my head high. Goodbye, I said calmly. Don't contact me again. That night, I left behind not just a house, but the weight of a family that had never truly valued me. For the first time in my life, I felt free. After that chaotic night, I made a decision. I was done seeking approval from people who would never value me. I cut ties with my parents and Jessica, blocking their numbers and ignoring any attempts at contact. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary. For years, I had lived under the weight of their favoritism, but now I was free to focus on what truly mattered, my own happiness and success. At Meridian Financial, I thrived. With each promotion, I took on more responsibilities, from leading investment strategies to implementing innovative algorithms that outpaced our competitors. My work not only brought in record-breaking returns for the firm, but also solidified my reputation in the industry. Then, the opportunity of a lifetime arrived. I was offered the position of CEO. At 32, I became the youngest person to ever lead Meridian Financial. It was a moment of triumph, proof that my hard work and resilience had paid off. Through it all, my grandparents remained my anchors. We had Sunday dinners every week where they celebrated my achievements as if they were their own. "You've made us so proud," Grandma often said, tears glistening in her eyes. Grandpa would always raise a toast, his voice steady and full of pride. To Tiffany, proof that integrity and determination win every time. Looking back, I see how far I've come. My parents' rejection, though painful, taught me to rely on myself and the people who truly cared for me. Jessica's life was a cautionary tale, but mine became an example of resilience. I learned to embrace my authentic self and stop chasing approval. My journey wasn't easy, but it shaped me into someone I'm proud to be, a woman who found her own path and created her own success.